Buonasera a tutti. Sì, era un invito a sedervi. Funziona sempre. Buonasera a tutti, grazie per essere intervenuti a questo panel della Social Media Week, che sarà in 2 lingue, una brevissima introduzione in italiano e per il resto parleremo quasi sempre in inglese. Prima di iniziare vorrei ringraziare il consolato americano, il consolato degli Stati Uniti a Milano, che ci ha aiutato a organizzare questa serata facendo intervenire il social media director, che dopo presenteremo meglio, della città di Chicago, che è Kevin Houseworth, che è con noi stasera. Gli altri ospiti li presento dopo, e subito quindi per una parola di saluto darei la parola al console per gli affari politico-economici del consolato americano di Milano, che è Richard Snellsire.
Ok, there we go. Buonasera a tutti, è un piacere per me di essere qui. Sono Rick Snellsire, console per gli affari politico-economici del consolato americano qui a Milano. Sono molto contento di essere qui per introdurre questo importante evento e desidero ringraziare gli organizzatori della Social Media Week, il Comune di Milano, chi ci ospita in questa bellissima cornice, e Kevin Houseworth, che ci ha raggiunto sin qua da Chicago per condividere la sua esperienza. Come sapete, Milano e Chicago sono gemellati del 2012, hanno festeggiato 50 anni di amicizia. Infatti, in occasione delle recenti elezioni presidenziali negli Stati Uniti, il consolato americano si è collegato in diretta con Chicago, sfruttando al meglio questa nuova tecnologia. Chicago è stata la prima città al mondo a dotarsi di un social media director che affianca giornalmente il sindaco e la sua amministrazione. Per questo, ben consapevole che Milano è la capitale digitale d'Italia, sono entusiasti di questo scambio di conoscenze che giova senz'altro alla città e ai suoi cittadini. L'esempio di Chicago dimostra come una pubblica amministrazione e i cittadini possono interagire attraverso i social media al fine di creare una nuova forma di cittadinanza attiva, avvicinando quindi i cittadini alle istituzioni. Tweets, apps, live streamings, hangouts sono alcuni dei nuovi strumenti che permettono al sindaco di Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, di governare la città con un livello di apertura e innovazione senza precedenti. So please turn your smartphones on and enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, just a brief introduction before.
Go ahead.
Okay. Since the consul spoke in Italian, I will try to speak in English now. We changed roles. So tonight we are discussing smart governance. So maybe we are discussing even something more. Maybe we'll end up talking about democracy. The question is, shouldn't governance be always smart? We are the Social Media Week, and when we talk about being smart, we think about technology and we think about new media. But shouldn't governance be smart also without technology and new media? The answer is yes, naturally, obviously, but it doesn't look like this. It's enough to have a look outside tonight. People are protesting, people are demonstrating. The trust in politics in Italy has had a loss in the last few months that is absolutely unprecedented. There is no trust in politics and there is no trust in administration. So people seem to be reacting to what Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote 300 years ago in The Social Contract. People are not free. He wrote, the English people think they are free, but they are gravely mistaken. People are not free today between one election and the other. They are free when they elect members of the parliament, but they are not afterwards. So the question tonight is, can the new media, can technology, can broadband internet and the dozens of social networks we can choose from help us build or rebuild in our case this relationship, and how can this be done? We are discussing this tonight with three guests. Let them introduce them to you. The ladies first, Antonella Napolitano. She's a blogger, a political writer, and representative for Personal Democracy Forum in Europe. Michele D'Alena is starting a social media team for the city of Bologna. And our keynote speaker tonight is Kevin Housworth, who is the social media director from the city of Chicago, appointed on day one, on the inauguration day by the new mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel. Maybe the first social media director in the world, I think, or one of the first, one of the first, sure. Let's say so. So please welcome Mr. Housworth.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for having me. It's been an amazing 2 days already here in Milan. We were talking about the last time I was in Milan. I was in college and was living out of a backpack, so this is a much different experience, and it's exciting. It's exciting to be here. So the way I thought we would talk a little bit tonight is to show you some examples of what we've done in Chicago and be sort of very real. I don't want to get into a philosophical discussion about the new role of new media and the internet. I think that's absolutely important, but I thought what would be most beneficial is to actually show you what we're trying to do. And I think every city that's doing this, if they tell you that they are an expert or a guru, they're lying. We're all trying to figure this out. I think we're all in this together. And I think in the spirit of collaboration, I want to share some of what we've been working on and hope that we can have a dialogue about what could work in other cities. So it all started on day one. Almost 2 years ago, we were elected Mayor Emanuel was elected in May of 2001. Prior to that, we had the same mayor in Chicago for about 20 years. And before that, there was about a 6-year window, and then his father was the mayor for about 20 years. So for a long period of time, Chicago was governed in a somewhat similar way. And this was the first, for a lot of us, this is the first time we've ever seen a new mayor in our adult lives in Chicago. So it was really an opportunity for us to do some things differently. Rahm Emanuel was a member of US Congress. He then went to the White House to be the chief of staff for President Barack Obama, left the White House to come and run for mayor. So a little historical context. So there's this idea of entrepreneurship that we always sort of talk about. And one of the things that we really look to do in government is to bring that sort of entrepreneurial spirit inside City Hall. I heard someone once call it an intrapreneur, where the idea is you have limited resources, you're trying to make big changes, but instead of trying to create a new organization, you're trying to create a new organization from inside of an existing organization. In this case, one that was 180 years old, which I know for you is like nothing when it comes to how old cities are. But for us, it's a big deal. This is the technology I got when I got to City Hall. This was in my office on my first day of work. I use it as a point of growth. And hopefully by the time we get done, we'll talk a little bit about how we came a long way. But technology really went from being something that was on a desk and something that was an add-on to really looking at how social media and digital technologies are at the core of how we need to run a city. So one of the things Mayor Emanuel did when he got to City Hall is he appointed, for the first time in the United States, 3 positions: head of data, head of technology, and head of social. That is extremely important because I would not be able to do my job well if I didn't have these other 2 people in the room. So the head of technology is really looking from a policy and an access perspective. So what's our Wi-Fi strategy? How do we get internet in all neighborhoods of Chicago? And he plays this very good visionary role. And what would a digital city look like in 2 years, in 3 years? And he's really part of the policy team. The head of data is relatively new for cities. And he's charged with open data. He runs the open data portal, which is data.cityofchicago.org. And he also has an analytics team. So looking at correlations in data for ways that we can make the city work better. So for example, what's the correlation between a street light being out and a car being broken into, or a health complaint and sickness at a restaurant? So they're really looking at this from a data analytics perspective. And hopefully you'll see how what is unique in Chicago is how these 3 roles kind of work together. So the way we sort of see this is transparent. And so the words in the big words here are really our guiding principles from the mayor. So he really wants us to build transparency and to make the city as transparent as possible. And that's important because it's going to help build trust. Because it's not coming from us, it's coming from the data. And as many would say, the answers are in the data. the ability for people to see us, and what we say is like sunlight coming into City Hall, will help us build a better workforce, because hopefully it'll help us improve efficiencies. Because it's not just the city watching to see how government is working, it's everybody watching. And we think that's going to improve our workforce and allow us to analyze to see how we can build better processes. Open data, we feel that it can also help build business. As we talk a lot about the role of open data, we really see that as sort of digital infrastructure. So traditional infrastructure is we build a road, and then businesses build on top of that road. We see open data as those digital roads. We put the data out there, we make it public, and we let the private sector build applications and develop new mapping technologies and to integrate that data with their tools. And the social media space is really where a lot of this collaboration can happen. This was one of the first tweets we got. A college student in Chicago, shortly after we established all these social media presence. Before we got there, there was no official sort of mayor's office, Twitter, Facebook, things of that nature. And this is an interesting point for us, because we have a system where people can report problems in the city. This was not in the system. So somebody took the time to take a picture of this and tweet it, but they didn't necessarily think to call us and tell us that it existed. So this picture is going to come back later on, and it was an example of how we need to use social media to get more information from the public. So not everyone calls up on the phone or writes a letter to the mayor's office, but they're going to tweet. So what this tells us is there is already a conversation going on that's pointing to places where the city needs to work better. We need to be part of those conversations, but then also work for ways to actually build solutions. So we've all seen these, right? The people are already talking. Government is late to the party. The people are already having these dialogues. But this is what intimidates us sometimes, because it's this overflow of data and this overflow of information. So what we need to try to figure out is how not just to take this in, we say through the fire hose, but to actually figure out what to do with this and how we can be actionable. One of the things I noticed when I got to City Hall is there were some social media accounts, like the park districts or some departments had small social media accounts. So one of the things I tried to do was find every single person I could find in City Hall who was managing a social media account. There were maybe a dozen. And so we all got into a room, and I said, so you all know each other, right? You're all running Facebook pages. No one knew each other. There was very little collaboration. So I said, so we're doing social alone, which kind of seemed counterintuitive to the nature of social media. So one of the things is that we always talk about social media best practices, and it's about sharing and collaboration and making friends and liking. We need to take those principles and integrate it into how we actually operate as a city. So we need to all be collaborating across departments and remove those barriers that sometimes keep governments from being inefficient. By nature of working in the social space that's open, city government needs to think how it's going to reorganize itself to adapt to that space and not expect the public space to adapt to us. So this is digital.cityofchicago.org. It's where we keep all things that are going on in the digital space. And one of the things you'll find on there is every single social media account we can find for the city. It's kind of like a phone book of social media accounts. The other thing that was really important is around certain times, we needed to be even more engaged. And around the budgeting season, when the city was getting ready to do their budget, we saw a lot of conversations happening online. And that shouldn't be surprising, because budget season is all about figuring out how to spend money. And every citizen has an idea on how the government can be spending money better. It's a natural part of being a citizen in a democracy. We get to try to tell the government how to spend its money better. So what we did for that is that we wanted to move the conversation off of Twitter into a space where we can be more organized. So we used a tool called Idea Scale. And you can see on the side, we tried to organize the conversations around issues, and then people could submit their ideas, vote the ideas up, and it allowed for city leaders to actually engage. So what we would do is we would download all these ideas and then send them to city leaders. So the Department of Transportation would get theirs, and the Department of Cultural Affairs would get theirs, and they would all help gather responses. And so people, as they were conversating with each other, so these are citizens talking to citizens, but then government leaders also came in as equal participants in the conversation and was able to involve themselves. So we got some great ideas out of here. It was also an opportunity for the government. Sometimes the ideas were things we had already done. So it was an opportunity to educate the public on programs that already existed. And so we were actually solving some problems just in the process of organizing information around the budget. We also created a forum for the mayor himself to get involved. We do these things called Facebook town halls, which is a live streamed town hall meeting through our Facebook page, where the questions are all submitted and voted on by the public. we did one of these for the budget. So the mayor sat in a room, and we talked about different things that come up on the budget, and now he is actually interacting. And there's one really important part, I think, to these Facebook town halls, is so on one side, you have the people submitting ideas or questions. The people vote on which questions are most important. The mayor then responds. So there's this dialogue between the people and the mayor. But that's on the video screen. Next to the video screen is the chat box. And below the video screen is the Twitter box. And that's where people are talking to other people. So I talked to this one woman after one of these meetings, and she said it wasn't just important that we were talking to the mayor, but next to it you had people from the north side of Chicago and the south side of Chicago who have never gone to each other's neighborhoods, are now having a fruitful conversation about things like recycling and crime and education. And those kind of dialogues didn't happen before. So we're not only seeing this interaction with government, but government is creating a place for the public to interact with each other, which is also an important part of this. All right, open data. This is a big part of these things. This is the city's data portal, where you'll find everything to how much money everybody makes, to the information about the budget. You'll also find lobbyist data, locations of parks. So there's a lot of geolocation data in here. So for any of you that are app developers, every bicycle rack is on here, bike lanes, parks, sort of that public data. But there's also government information. Part of the reason that this is actually an example of the budget, line by line of the budget. So what you're looking at now, if you want to know how much the airport spends on advertising, this is all online. So if you can use Excel, you can read it. If you're a developer, you can build off an API in here. One of the parts that's really important to this is as we're having this conversation on Twitter or on social media, this is where we talked about building honesty. So I could tweet things about the budget, but you can test to see if I'm telling you the truth, which I always am, and the truth is in here too. The other part that's really interesting about this is that there are visualizations. So if we, as a city, are going to have a conversation with each other about the budget, it's important that we're all as informed as possible so we can have a really educated conversation about the budget. So one of the things that you find during budgeting is it's really hard to kind of understand what a dollar is really worth or what money actually buys. This is a visualization of where the money goes in city government. So if you can't see this big blue box, that's the police department. The green box is the fire department. The blue box underneath is the Department of Water Management. So about 60-ish% of our entire budget is used to pay for police, fire, and water. So if we're going to have a real conversation about where we can make cuts from and what the money's going to mean, it's important that we know where the money's going. And one of the things, for example, that we saw when people were commenting it with their ideas was reduce the size of the mayor's office or reduce the size of the city council, which we welcome those suggestions. But you can also see, just based on the numbers, what kind of money is there. Those are those little small boxes in the corner. So we can have a real conversation about what kind of things we're able to do. We also put out data like food inspections. So when the inspectors go to a restaurant to check and see if it's safe, this is the restaurant data. So you can see if you're eating somewhere, if they pass the restaurant inspection. We also published every crime that's taken place in the past 20 years in Chicago. So this is just a map that's on our data portal, but you can see around your neighborhood crimes that have taken place, and app developers could use this to build all sorts of applications. So now we're allowing this, when we talk about transparency, this is getting outside of just having this in the city, and this is actually one of our more controversial and unprecedented data sets. This is probably one of my favorites. The city also keeps performance metrics. So for example, if you have graffiti on your home and you call the city and tell them, we have a goal of how many days it should take us to clean up that graffiti. Now we publish if the city actually makes those goals. So you can actually see by time it takes to fulfill a service if the city is working for you. This is an example of garbage truck drivers calling in sick to work. So everybody can see this. The mayor can see this, the people can see this, the commissioners can see this, and it's a way that we can allow the public to help us, hold us accountable for improving city services. This is what we like to call Snowmageddon. So the winter before, I know you guys got some snow last week, and snow's coming here. Hopefully it doesn't look like this. This is the winter before we took office. This happened in Chicago, and we got this blizzard that just basically shut down the city. It was crazy. So we knew coming into this that around emergencies, people need to connect more, and they need more resources for. Like if you're the guy in that car you really need to connect with people. So we wanted to make sure that we not only gave people more resources to get through the winter, but also use this as a way to be transparent and to allow the public to hold us accountable. So I learned that there is a GPS in every single truck the city has, including snow trucks, snow plows, it's in the bottom. So this is information that the city already had, because it's how we manage all of our cars. We made it public. So everyone can see the location of more than 300 snow plows in real time. So if you're sitting at work, you can see and watch. And this was the most traffic we had ever gotten to our website. It was like Pac-Man, but just with snow plows. But it can't just be the government building, right? We talked about, we lay the digital infrastructure. These are some examples of visualizations and things that we put out as a city, but the real future is going to be in how public developers build things on their own. So this is just us at an incubator in Chicago. But there are tons of civic applications being built by independent Chicago developers who are doing this because it's their way of volunteering, and it's their way of contributing to the city. On digital.cityofchicago.org, you'll find our version of the App Store. So these are applications built using city data that government did not build, that the private sector built. You have things like during a teacher's strike, we built a location of places where people could take their children when the schools were closed. The health department puts out data of every place in Chicago where the health department gives free condoms. It didn't take long for somebody to build a map out of that. So this one is a little more, there's a little bit more meat to this one. We publish the lobbyist data. So every lobbyist who registers with the city, who they're paying, who they're lobbying, how much they're being paid, and what issues they're lobbying about. We put the data out. An independent developer made this site. So this is one of those places where we put the data out, and now the level of government transparency is being increased with the help of Chicago developers. We also use social media to figure out ways to get people connected with flu shots during the winter. The reason I put this one up is one that we got the mayor to help us out, and we were trying to spread the word. We were having a Twitter chat where we had a doctor from the health department chatting with the public about questions about the flu. But this was the first time where we put an application on our website that wasn't built by the city. It was our data. It was a civic developer who says he likes to hack after he puts his kids to bed. So he's this dad in the city who likes building apps. He built this app. We put it on the city's website. And during the flu outbreak in the United States, we gave our code to other cities. So within 24 hours, or within 48 hours of us sending the code to Boston, Boston had their own flu map. And Philadelphia had their own flu map. Using code that was developed by a volunteer in Chicago, put together with data from other cities, and now other cities can use this to build their own flu maps, and it's essentially free. One more real quick. We're doing bike share in Chicago, like I believe you have here. So we're trying to figure out where we want to put the bikes. So we've made a public map so the people can help tell us where they might want the bikes. So as we're working with the bike company, we can make sure that public information is part of where we're making decisions. But again, we get back to this. We still haven't fixed the chair in the road. So a lot of these things are great for transparency and for creating new applications, but how can we actually improve city services using new media techniques? We worked with an organization called Code for America. If any of you ever heard there's a program called Teach for America where they send teachers to areas of the city, of the United States that might need help. Code for America is basically it's a nonprofit organization that sends web developers and application developers to work on civic projects, to work on city projects. So they built a system called Open 311. So whenever somebody has a problem in the city, graffiti, a hole in the ground, a street light being out, you can pick up the phone in Chicago, dial 311, and there's a phone center, and there are people working to take down your complaint and get it out to the agencies. So that you can only do that through the phone and through like a very ugly web application that someone probably made before I was born. So what this is doing is now 311 can take email. There's an API, so you could build an app. You, as a developer, can build an app that allows you to take a picture of graffiti and get that into our system. You can also use text messaging to get it into our system. So now we've increased the ways that the city can intake information in the hopes that we can better, so we catch those tweets or those conversations, for example, that didn't get reported to us. Now we're hoping they can be reported to us. But the bigger piece is this whole thing's open. So you can find every single service call that came into the city is public. And if you're a developer, you can develop an app that goes right into this. This app is one of the first apps that was made for this platform. It was built by a city council member. During the city council member's campaign, he created his own app that did this, but it just emailed things. He couldn't get into the system. So he changed it to now sync right with the system, so his staff doesn't have to sit there and type in all these complaints. You can also check the status of it. So anyone that's sent a package with FedEx and you can see where the package is going, now you can see that with graffiti or with potholes, or you can see with streetlight out. So we give you a tracking number, just like FedEx, and you can see where it is along the process and have a sense of when it's going to get done. And then we can email you once it's done. So you can get an email saying, congratulations, your graffiti has been cleaned off your wall. Thank you so much for reporting it. It also allows other websites to integrate that technology into what they do. So that's data and technology. And I said I couldn't kind of do my job in social media without them. So when people are tweeting that picture of the chair in the ground, or they're tweeting with the mayor's office about service issues, I now, instead of getting into a dialogue, a back and forth about what color was the graffiti, how high is it on the wall, I can just respond with a link and say, use Open 311 and let us know where it is. So it makes my job easier and more efficient. This is a perfect example. A guy tweeted, he just hit one of the worst potholes, the worst hole in the ground he's ever seen. CDOT is the Chicago Department of Transportation. They tweet back and said, we hear you, we're sorry, use this link to fill it out. They got it done, and the Department of Transportation said, actually, we had crews in the area. Like we already had a truck near that pothole, so we just filled it. So like it's done. So the city is able to modify how they're providing service because now we have more data about where the needs are. But we're still allowed to have fun. So this was Halloween. Social media's got to be a little fun, right? Like we're supposed to be real people, human beings having a conversation. We believe that because our mayor has a sense of humor, we're allowed to have a sense of humor. So for Halloween, after we took office, this is a picture of the mayor riding in a train in Chicago. We photoshopped some zombies onto the train and just wrote, in case of zombie apocalypse, stay calm like Rom. And so I'll end it right there and leave time for questions. Never keep that under 30 minutes. That was crazy.
But you did, actually. You were the quickest speaker I've ever seen.
Was that too fast?
No, it was okay. So thank you very much. As far as I know, Chicago is certainly a best practice case, let's say put it this way. But I think something like 87% of the American cities are on Facebook, are on social media. It's not quite the same in Italy, but we'll ask Antonella later about this. The question is, when a city uses social media, what should it use them for? In Italy, the main cities now are on Facebook, let's say Rome, Naples, Florence, Venice, Milan, and so on. But some of them are experimenting, Milan, for example. They are trying to do CRM too, and they are dialoguing with people. Some of them chose not to dialogue, not to have any conversation with people, but just to use it as a showcase, like the capital of Italy, Rome and Naples. Does it make any sense? What do you think being there should mean for a city? What should social media be used for in order to have sense? That's a question for the three of you.
I just spent a half hour. You can go right ahead.
Ok, allora partiamo da Michele. Che senso ha per una città essere su Facebook, su Twitter o scegliere un social network su cui essere? È sufficiente esserci o bisogna svolgere determinate attività? È la domanda base questa, naturalmente, perché molte città italiane hanno scelto di esserci semplicemente fornendo informazioni.
Buonasera. Devo dire che è evidente che questo tipo di media cambia la relazione con la pubblica amministrazione. La domanda secondo me è vera, però a un certo punto c'è anche una sorta di dovere dell'amministratore che in qualche modo deve gestire e indirizzare questo tipo di comunicazione. Per quanto riguarda, per quel che posso dire per il Comune di Bologna, siamo molto fortunati perché è chiaro che settimana scorsa, un caso, c'è la neve e un commento nella pagina del sindaco, quindi non è comunicazione istituzionale, non gestita dal comune, un commento di un ragazzo ha avuto 1500 like. Il ragazzo chiedeva, beh, ci sono gli orsi polari in giro, domani non si va a scuola, vero? 1500 like. È chiaro che c'è questo tipo di comunicazione, ben vengano i 1000 like su la cosa simpatica, però è stato nostro obiettivo da circa, almeno da quando ci sono io, quindi un paio d'anni, un anno e mezzo, cercare di indirizzare la comunicazione e creare dei percorsi con degli obiettivi chiari. Per cui dire, va bene, mettimi il like, condividimi la foto e poi se avrò l'occasione vi farò vedere alcuni esempi di comunicazione più giocosa, ma parallelamente c'è anche la gestione dell'emergenza e lì è l'esempio clamoroso, la gestione dell'emergenza, non solo la neve ma anche il terremoto che ci ha colpito l'anno scorso in parte. Percorsi di beta testing su alcuni servizi che abbiamo fatto, questionari online su alcune politiche relativamente a chiudere alcune zone del centro, per cui io credo che i più di 20 milioni di italiani che sono su Facebook, come pubblica amministrazione abbiamo il dovere di dare una direzione più civica. È chiaro che ci sono alcuni territori più pronti. Bologna ha università, centri di ricerca, imprese, quindi a Bologna è nata la seconda rete civica in Europa con Amsterdam, quindi c'è anche un retaggio culturale molto forte, specialmente anche tra i colleghi è forte questa idea di ritornare al futuro, per cui io credo che e dentro la pubblica amministrazione io ho trovato poi io vi farò vedere alcuni esempi a costo zero, cioè non abbiamo mai, a parte alcuni pochissimi casi, esternalizzato nessun servizio, per cui vi farò vedere il Tumblr che abbiamo fatto per la strage del 2 agosto, a Bologna c'è stata questa 1980 e ogni anno il 2 agosto è una data molto sentita per i bolognesi e quest'anno su idea di un collega abbiamo fatto un Tumblr che raccoglie tutti i materiali che sono persi per la rete e questo ha avuto un valore molto forte per la cittadinanza, per cui questo esempio, tutti gli altri che vi ho citato prima, secondo me fanno capire ai bolognesi che nella nostra pagina Facebook ci possono parlare come dei cittadini che vogliono aiutare la pubblica amministrazione. Poi succedono alcuni casi incredibili per cui ci siamo ritrovati quest'anno ad avere 4 hackathon in cui la pubblica amministrazione ha solo facilitato.
Abbiamo 3 microfoni per volta, sì. Quindi non è sufficiente secondo te esserci e basta, bisogna esserci e interagire.
Assolutamente sì, ma io credo che ci siano gli esempi per capire questo. È chiaro che serve un mandato politico forte, perché comunque ci deve essere uno staff che pensa costantemente a questo.
Questo sarà il cuore della discussione dopo. What about you? Do you think it's enough, or it's at least a start, just to be there and use the social media as a showcase, or has it any sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think cities should be using Twitter just like cities should be using telephones and email. It's another communications channel. I think sometimes the problem is that if you're looking for inspiration and ideas for what to do in social media, don't look in social media. at the end of the day, we're trying to solve problems that real people have in real life. And one of the ways we're trying to connect with them is the internet. But how to engage people online, there are usually answers offline. And there are usually people at cities who are already very good at this. So one of the things I think is worth noting, we just started this 2 years ago. I was new, but I'm on the communications team. So I'm a communications person that kind of understands this. We brought in a data person and we brought in a technology person. All these other social media accounts, public health, education, transportation, those were people who are already really good at their jobs and really good at communicating with people, and we showed them how to use social media. So sometimes it's somebody who's been in their job for 10, 20 years, they understand everything, and it was about showing them Twitter, and they look at it for 10 minutes and they're like, I can do this, this is easy. This is just talking to people. I talk to people every day. So it wasn't about trying to create a brand new top-down strategy. It was about empowering people who are already good at engaging and giving them another tool. So I think that it's important not to overthink how the space works. At the end of the day, it's about talking to people. You're just doing it in a more robust space, and it's more public, so you need to be sure people are prepared to as I say, it's just like having a conversation. Just don't say anything you wouldn't say in front of your mother, because everyone's going to see it. So it's just, you have to be slightly more dedicated on how you're doing. But I think across the board, our approach at Chicago was like this, not sort of like this. We empowered people who were good, and we did a lot of training and a lot of collaboration. But it's a space you have to be in, because at the end of the day, that's where the public is. And if you have, one last piece, if you have questions about how the public wants to use social media, how about you ask the public? One of the things that the transportation group did that runs the trains in Chicago is they started a Twitter feed. Because if you're on a train and you're not moving, the first thing you're doing is tweeting about it. So they knew it was a space where people in Chicago were already engaging around trains. So when they started putting a lot of historical photos of trains. Like, this is what trains looked like 100 years ago in Chicago. And there was interesting things in there if you're very, very, very interested in trains. But the part that they found was they put out a survey, a very simple online survey, and they tweeted it. And it was basically, what do you want us to use this for? And the people said, tell us where the trains are. Which they can do. They just didn't think that people really wanted to have all that on their Twitter feed. So now they already have a customer service team who works 24 hours a day to work on issues. They taught them how to update Twitter when there were problems on the train, and they trained people that when there was a problem to interact with them. So the people said, I want to know where the trains are. I'm less interested in pictures of the trains. So they changed. So the government changed to adapt to the people. And I think that's sort of an example of how we have to be listening to structure, and the people will tell us what they want.
Services, not showcases, probably.
What's that?
Services, not just showcases,
sure.
Probably. Antonella, can you give us an overview of what's happening in Italy, Europe, or the world, I don't know, or the universe in this?
Okay. Okay, on Mars, no. The interesting thing, if you look at international perspective, is that several similar things are happening in different parts of the world. When we first discussed this panel with Paola, I thought that it would have been interesting to bring some good practices from Europe, but then in the end I found that there were many interesting things in parts of the world that are not Europe, are not at the same they have the same digital penetration. For example, we saw the Chicago Idea Scale project, but a few months ago in the capital of Armenia, Yerevan, a similar project was created by the city with the funding of the United Nations Development Program. And in just a day, they had 50 proposals of things to do in the city, things to discuss in the city council, and only 23% of Armenian citizens use the internet. More than half of the population do not have an internet connection, but the urgency of communicating with public administration was as strong as it could be in Jakarta, which is the most social media connected city with 17 million people on Twitter. The interesting thing here is that citizens now want to have a conversation with the public administration, but also, as we saw in the previous examples, inputs are overwhelming structures. So there are data and needs and problems to be solved that are now have a almost infinite playground to create a confrontation. And as we read, transparency builds trust. So it's I read a couple of days ago a post by actually an Italian expert on open data and open government, Alberto Cottica, which some of you may know, and he wrote about how it's not about how many downloads your open data set has, or how many things you do, but how can you create a form of trust. And as Paola said before, in this period of constant loss of trust towards our politicians, towards the people that govern us, creating a way to dialogue with citizens, but to listen, first of all, to citizens, it's something that is happening pretty much worldwide in different ways. In the UK, there's this project called Fix My Street, which is quite well known, and it was created by an organization called My Society. It basically gives citizens a way to report potholes, graffiti, lighting problems. Same thing that we saw in this, like in the city of Chicago activities. So this organization, Fix My Street, helps citizens connect to their local council. But of course, it's easy to imagine that a citizen would feel so much more empowered and so much more connected to their city, administrators, if they knew that, as Chicago does, there is just a direct connection. They can talk to the city, and the city listen, and sometimes can adapt. That doesn't mean that, and that it's an important point that I hope we can discuss later. That doesn't mean that citizens and public administration are on the same level and have the same power to make decisions. Of course, it's not like that. And of course, the city, good administration should educate the people on how city works, how the budget works, as we saw, but also to create a conversation that explains to the citizens what is being done, what citizens can do, because it's about participation, but it's about also civic engagement. It's about creating a sort of an ecosystem that has the city as a facilitator, not only as an administrator.
Thank you very much. Magari approfondiamo adesso il lavoro che state facendo abbastanza recente sul social media team di Bologna, perché voi siete partiti lavorando sull'agenda, tu sei partito a Bologna lavorando sull'agenda digitale con un assessore e adesso stai lanciando una vera e propria squadra che lavorerà sui social media, giusto? Forse hai delle slide da farci vedere?
Sì, ma potevo andare anche. Perfetto. Allora, vado veloce sull'agenda digitale, che è stato un percorso partecipato è partito a gennaio dell'anno scorso, online e offline. Abbiamo fatto un blog dedicato dove descrivevamo tutti gli incontri, tutte le idee che arrivavano, una tag dedicata, per cui grande lavoro online per mappare tutto l'esistente, tutte le imprese, le start-up, i blog, l'università, una media di 80-100 persone ad evento. Quando abbiamo inaugurato e lanciato il portale degli Open Data, la sala non bastava e nessuno se lo sarebbe aspettato per un contesto come quello di Bologna. Appunto occasioni come quello dell'hackathon dedicato a creare delle app per il terremoto, non le ha fatte la pubblica amministrazione, ma la pubblica amministrazione ha fatto di tutto per creare l'ambiente affinché queste idee possano essere realizzate. Cosa ha fatto l'agenda digitale? L'agenda digitale ha creato un documento dove per la prima volta si trovava tutta la politica sul digitale, per cui dalle infrastrutture, banalmente abbiamo cominciato a monitorare, perché prima non si monitorava e quindi neanche i cittadini potevano sapere quanti wifi c'erano. Ok, c'era la mappa, però adesso di anno in anno, se l'assessore dice ok, noi puntiamo sul digitale, possiamo dire ok, è vero, ci sono stati aperti 10 punti in più, prima non lo potevamo dire. Siamo riusciti in qualche modo anche a collegare e a formalizzare quello che è la gestione dell'emergenza. Durante il terremoto abbiamo levato le password che per legge siamo obbligati a tenere, purtroppo, per cui davvero in 20 minuti abbiamo levato le password di accesso. Questi sono alcuni degli esempi che prima vi citavo. Coinvolgimento. A Bologna abbiamo la fortuna di poter contare su quello che è un dipartimento diffuso che è pronto a collaborare con noi. Molto spesso le idee non sono dentro la pubblica amministrazione ma sono fuori, però è evidente che troviamo imprese, associazioni, cittadini che sono pronti a condividerle con la pubblica amministrazione al fine di trovare la soluzione migliore. Un altro passo importante che abbiamo fatto è stata l'analisi di tutti i canali social del Comune di Bologna. Per anni non c'era stata una politica di gestione, per cui ci siamo messi lì, tra l'altro c'è anche Francesca in sala che ha fatto lo stage con noi e che ci ha dato una mano a fare questo pezzo di ricerca. Ci siamo messi lì e abbiamo visto ok, chi è che risponde su Facebook, chi è che è solo lì per fare bella figura, e quindi adesso siamo nel momento in cui stiamo chiudendo dei canali perché abbiamo deciso di rinforzare e di creare, di razionalizzare le energie. L'abbiamo fatto per Facebook, l'abbiamo fatto per Twitter, per cui siamo arrivati a capire che abbiamo più di 90.000 fan tra il canale principale, tra quello di Sala Borsa, del teatro, del museo, eccetera eccetera. Twitter uguale. Qui alcuni casi che vi faccio vedere. Facebook, qui è il lato più giocoso, per cui condividiamo su Facebook alcune foto fatte da utenti. Questa sulla sinistra è di ieri, dall'altro ieri, per cui cerchiamo in qualche modo di tenere viva la comunità anche attraverso questi giochini social object, per dirla all'americana, ma andiamo anche su cose un po' più pesanti. Il tweet in basso ha avuto 1789 retweet ed era il tweet in cui dicevamo di non usare le linee telefoniche durante lo sciame sismico perché era crollato tutto il sistema del telefono, per cui potevamo comunicare solo attraverso il web. Ci tengo a dire una cosa: questo tweet non ha avuto nessun mandato dall'alto, cioè questo tweet è stata un'intuizione di un mio collega che è un utente evoluto della rete e che abbiamo la fortuna di avere in staff in quello che è il social media team del Comune di Bologna, per cui alle 9.02 c'è stata la scossa, alle 9.17 aveva fatto il tweet come Comune di Bologna, avendo una diffusione pazzesca. Abbiamo fatto un Pinterest che raccoglie le foto, il materiale del 25 aprile, anche qui lato un po' più leggero se volete, ma fino a un certo punto, esatto. Abbiamo fatto un contest su Flickr con 450 foto arrivate dagli utenti. 450 foto che parlano di 450 Bologna diverse, perché evidentemente qui l'idea era quella di aumentare la reputazione di Bologna sul principale social network delle foto, per cui io ne ho messe qui alcune. È evidente che stiamo parlando della stessa città, ma sono immaginari diversi. La pubblica amministrazione mai avrebbe potuto pensare a questa Bologna così diversa una dall'altra. Questo era il caso che vi citavo prima del Tumblr dedicato a costruire una memoria condivisa, quindi uno per non perdere le tracce della più grande strage che Bologna ha vissuto, e dall'altra per comunicare alle nuove generazioni con nuovi strumenti comunicativi quello che è stato il 2 agosto del 1980. Vado verso la fine. Open Data, abbiamo il nostro portale, 190 dataset pubblicati, l'ultimo è su tutto il bilancio, l'anagrafe degli eletti. Siamo un po' orgogliosi della collezione delle mappe in 3D della città di Bologna, forse l'unico caso, perché abbiamo una collaborazione col Cineca, un centro di ricerca. Abbiamo un blog dedicato al bilancio, con l'idea era quella di raccontare, ok, abbiamo il bilancio in open data, ma dobbiamo raccontarlo, dobbiamo renderlo più accessibile e trasparente, e quindi qui con il dirigente, con l'assessore del bilancio abbiamo deciso di aprire un blog verticale in cui i cittadini possono chiedere chiarimenti sul bilancio. Vado alla fine. Questo è il social media team che è nato praticamente 20 giorni fa. Siamo in 6, 2 social media manager, un coordinatore, un addetto più alla parte multimedia, e qui stiamo cercando di far partire il cantiere di quello che sarà la nuova rete civica del Comune di Bologna. Come dicevo prima, Bologna ha avuto la seconda rete civica in Europa. A fine mese cominceremo questo cantiere, ci stiamo lavorando, vorremmo arrivare a fare un capitolato scritto in maniera condivisa con l'università, con i centri di ricerca, con chi vuole essere dalla partita. Perché a Bologna abbiamo capito che c'è una community digitale molto attiva che è pronta a darci una mano. Spesso la pubblica amministrazione non ha il tempo, non ha le competenze e non ha le risorse. Fuori, assieme, si può creare qualcosa di condiviso. Credo che sia l'ultima slide, e volevo finirla con l'hackathon di Spaghetti Open Data, la più grande community italiana dedicata agli Open Data. Noi abbiamo avuto la fortuna di poter ospitare questo hackathon, e abbiamo visto nascere Tweet Antonio, che è un'applicazione che permette a tutti i cittadini di comunicare via Twitter a tutti i politici. Questo è nato a Bologna grazie anche a un piccolo lavoro che ha fatto la pubblica amministrazione. Credo di aver... finisco con i 2 bandi che adesso sono attivi. Uno dedicato all'agenda digitale, sono pochi, sono 100.000 euro, però l'idea è quella di dare visibilità a questa che è la collaborazione, più un grosso bando da 2,6 milioni di euro dedicato allo sviluppo dell'idea imprenditoriale. Io con questo ho finito, grazie.
Grazie Michele. It was one of my last questions, but since Michele talked about the earthquake in Emilia-Romagna, I'll put the same question to you. Did you ever experience a primary crisis management on social media for Chicago?
In government, every day is crisis management. So yes. No, so the snow that we were preparing for never actually came. We had relatively soft winters. That being said, we had the snow. We had the tracker that we saw with the map. We also created a program that folks were starting to use called Adopt a Sidewalk. And this was a Code for America code that was written for another city that we adapted, which allowed, so the user experience was, well, let me back up. The real life experience is that people in Chicago take a lot of pride in clearing off the sidewalk in front of their house. There's like this sort of pride of like, I'm the guy who shoveled the entire sidewalk. So we wanted to create a way to sort of gamify this and take the idea of something very boring of like shoveling your driveway, but make it into a game. So the way Adopt a Sidewalk worked is that we, the city, have to clear the streets, but you're responsible for in front of your house. So the sidewalk in front of your house for people to walk. So the game was, you can click on the sidewalk in front of your house and kind of own it and claim it on it. You could then share with other people around you to say, oh, I need an extra shovel, or I'll make coffee, or whatever. So the city can come together. And we had hundreds and hundreds of people signing up for this thing. We used it a little bit, but we haven't really gotten to play with it real hard yet because the winters have been slow. The one other thing that we did do is that there are a lot of people who either elderly or they have a disability and they aren't able to get around, they aren't able to clear their sidewalks. But there are plenty of people who are willing to help. So we created a way for, if you need help, you can call the city and say, you know, I'm 80 years old, I can't get out and I need some help. And we can pair you with someone in your neighborhood who's willing to lend a hand and willing to help you out. And we called that the Chicago Snow Corps, kind of like the Peace Corps, but with snow. And that was another piece that we used to help manage that. The one other thing I'll say, and it's nothing like an earthquake, but one of the things that we find, and this is kind of in this world of misinformation that people have, is like after it rains, if your electricity goes out, the city doesn't actually run electricity. Private companies run electricity. So if your power goes out, you should call the electric company. You shouldn't call the mayor's office. But a lot of people didn't know that. So we kind of what we try to do is anticipate things that people are going to say so that we can start getting the word out sooner. And the hope is that we can minimize calls that are coming into the city to maximize efficiency of the employees. So they're not getting all these calls they shouldn't. And so almost solve the problem before it happens. But I'm waiting for a big earthquake.
Hope not.
Yeah, right.
Be prepared. Okay, let's come to the heart of the question. The relationship. We have two parties in a relationship. In this case, we have the people, the citizens who are governed by a local government, an administration, a nation. And as I mentioned before, and this is at least for Italy, the level of the trust that people have in the persons who govern them, it has never been that low, at least here. And we're voting in a few days. It will be funny to see the results. On the other hand, or not, maybe not. And on the other hand, so we have people who are enraged in some way, and most of the times, or very often when they arrive to the social media, when given the opportunity to talk to the administration, they use it just to insult the administration and to criticize it. And on the other hand, we have administrators who were born and raised in a completely different world and who are not, or always not, ready to listen to the people and to be humble enough to accept the criticism on the insults by them and show them the contrary. So how do we educate the two parties to build this relationship? Difficult question.
So, okay. So I like to use the phrase baby steps whenever you're trying to have some, and that's not an insult to anyone. When you're trying, I prefer to find places where we can prove that we're right rather than trying to convince somebody to completely change. So when it came to the city, we looked for, so if we have, say, 20 different organizations that are going to use social media, let's start with 4 and find 4 that the public really wants to engage with. So there's already a need from the public. You've got a leader who's open-minded and willing to do this, and then you can sort of start there. And then what we did is that we communicated our successes to the other agencies. So what happened often with me is that since I was in the mayor's office, other organizations would say, oh, well, of course you can do it because you're in the mayor's office. I'm over here in some department. We don't have the same resources. So it was very important to me to demonstrate achievements and small wins at that level and start there. I think you can't start here and kind of bring a city. You start here and you build. So, you know, the health department was a great place to go. The Department of Transportation was a great place. They had leaders that were engaged, and we could build on those successes, and then figure out what works as you keep going.
Michele, questa relazione invece nella città di Bologna tu l'hai riscontrata, cioè hai trovato amministratori pronti a aprirsi all'ascolto delle persone e persone pronte a partecipare e non solo esprimere frustrazione online?
Allora, io faccio una parentesi, la differenza tra comunicazione politica e comunicazione istituzionale. Perché parlare dell'assessore che risponde e del sindaco che risponde non è comunicazione istituzionale, e per cui lì...
Non sotto elezioni, si intende nell'amministrazione normale.
E quindi è un po' un terreno limite interessantissimo. Io devo dire che quando ho incontrato l'assessore al bilancio che mi parlava del blog, io gli ho detto: ah, ma facciamo di open data, è chiaro. Cioè, io mi aspettavo un assessore che dicesse: no, ma perché? No, assolutamente sì, non abbiamo niente da nascondere, anzi siamo in difficoltà e vogliamo che i cittadini capiscano che noi investiamo tot milioni di euro sulle biblioteche. Io voglio che i cittadini sappiano che stiamo investendo X milioni di euro sugli spazzaneve, e quindi questa è chiaro. Adesso stavo leggendo un tweet: se dagli italiani la possibilità di parlare con un'amministrazione la useranno per insultarla. Io credo che sia parzialmente vero nel momento in cui non siamo stati abituati a parlare con la pubblica amministrazione, per cui è chiaro che all'inizio c'è un dazio da pagare, però questo poi secondo me la dialettica si costruisce pubblicando i dati e quindi avviando una dialettica sana, trasparente, scendendo in piazza e incontrando le parti in causa. È chiaro che io sto parlando di Bologna e quindi è chiaro che molti potranno dire non è un esempio rappresentativo, invece sì, perché l'anno scorso, cioè 3 anni fa, c'era un commissario al comune di Bologna, quindi cioè, non è che siamo partiti, si facevano in sordina i colleghi che gestiscono i social media, lo facevano anche 2 anni fa, però lo facevano magari un po' meno, con meno coordinamento, con meno visibilità, con meno mandato politico. Adesso è un po' cambiata, è chiaro, e sta cambiando anche, secondo me, l'attenzione, per cui sui 500.000 bolognesi noi sappiamo che se viene il social media director di Chicago domani a Bologna, noi sappiamo che quelle 50-80 bolognesi verranno, perché sappiamo che, adesso tocco ferro, magari domani va malissimo, però è chiaro che noi abbiamo delle comunità che non aspettano altro, e ogni volta che abbiamo chiesto, vi prendo gli ultimi 30 secondi, Smart City Exhibition, la fiera sulla Smart City, l'idea era quella di prendere uno stand della fiera e far vedere quanto bravi siamo a fare la Smart City, per cui idea che viene dall'alto, no? E quindi il comune, l'aeroporto, l'interporto, le grandi aziende, e a un certo punto abbiamo avuto l'idea, che abbiamo fatto passare, di fare un contest: mandateci le vostre proposte. Siamo stati inondati di proposte, per cui abbiamo fatto una carrellata in 3 giorni, 100 persone, 100 relatori, c'erano più di 52 progetti, in cui il comune parlava del progetto di riforestazione e vicino ci abbiamo messo gli orti, i guerriglia garden in urbano. Si parlava dello smart grid, ok, e vicino c'era lo studente di ingegneria che ha pensato l'app per hackerare il wifi pubblico. Cioè abbiamo cercato di mettere insieme e creare delle sottocommunity, la community del verde, la community delle tecnologie, per farle dialogare tra quello che è l'istituzione e quello che è invece l'idea un po' più dal basso, un po' più, che forse è quella che ci fa fare i passi in avanti, che non guarda ai budget, che non fa business plan, ma guarda solo ai problemi e cerca di risolverli. Io credo che questa grande mole di cittadini che sono sui social media sono una grandissima occasione per le pubbliche amministrazioni per ripensarsi. Abbiamo solo un grande problema, che ci troviamo di fronte a un middle management che non è pronto, che culturalmente è cresciuto in un altro ambiente, e per cui chiedere su Twitter qual è la soluzione tecnologica più avanzata per il wifi sembra un'eresia, quando invece è la soluzione più intelligente, economica, meritocratica che ci sia.
I said, can I add, but I don't know what you said, so I don't know if I'm adding. If I'm repeating, no, it's my apologies. I'm in your city. If I am repeating everything, just interrupt me. Okay, so two things. One is on criticism and one is on trust. Trust is something you earn by listening and being honest. And how many times in our own lives has someone said, I don't agree with you, but thank you for being honest? Or at least thank you for listening. And I think that's the first part. If you're starting from zero and you've had no relationship, then you have to start as a relationship like you would, which is sometimes we're not going to agree, but at least we're talking. And I think that's okay as things start to build. The thing on criticism, not all criticism is created equal. There are different kinds of criticism. And I think that as you start looking, and it's the same for positive feedback. But so if you start with, and this is an exercise you can probably do with your boss, is that you start with, you do an exercise and you gather tweets that are negative and that are criticism. And you start looking at why are they criticism and what kind of criticism. And you might find that this group right here, they hate us and we're never going to change their minds. They're just going to be part of this set that we can call them, we're not going to influence them. But you might have a group over here that just have the wrong information. And you might be able to change their minds by showing them, we hear you. Have you actually looked at the data set? That's not how it works. Or why do we pay these people so much? Well, actually, they're volunteers. We don't pay them. So they're not hard to find. You will find a group of tweets from people who just simply are missing something and don't understand. And that is a group that's easy to persuade because all you have to do is tell them the truth, and hopefully there's something out there where you can show them the truth. So that's a group of people that we just kind of took from our they don't like us to now they know something else about us, and maybe their perception will change because we've educated them. So I think it's really important to kind of look through that. And the thing that you'll start finding, there's another group, which is maybe the government actually is doing something badly. Maybe it isn't you. Maybe it's us. So maybe there's enough feedback around a certain issue that can give us some insights and can give us as a government an education about things that aren't working for the people that we're supposed to be serving. So maybe feedback can actually help us change and help us improve. And I think that's an important part of it. I think you have to be open. And I used to say when I was in the private sector, I used to say that we have to look at the difference between a communication problem and a product problem. Do we really have a Twitter problem, or do we have a bad service problem? And I think we need to be open-minded that what we're going to hear back, we have to be able to be actionable. And sometimes action is a verbal response. Sometimes action is actually looking at ways that we can actually change and be better. And that is what democracy is all about.
Yeah, I think it's the ability of changing the fact that many people have all the right of being angry and being frustrated in a way of making them participate. Not just criticize, but participate in making things better together with administration. So, Antonella, vuoi aggiungere qualcosa?
Yes, I'd like to add that that's something I was saying before. It's very important for citizens to find ways to do something relevant. For example, in these past few weeks, there is a small association here in Milan that is working with homeless people. They have their bases at the central station, and they ask people to come and help them, like volunteering. They're gonna have in the coming days, they're gonna try to list all the people. They ask for citizen help, and the city of Milan and the on their like social media channels kind of gave a call to action for citizens. It's not something that it's like in charge of the city council. It's something that an association did, but they kind of gave a the city, like the social media channels, gave more voice to this initiative, and then the association is handling themselves. But it's really important, for example, for citizens to understand that I want to do something relevant. I'm doing it myself. My association is doing that, but the city, like the public institution, the local institution, is listening to me, is helping me as far as it can. So maybe like the only thing is that a dialogue can be created, but a dialogue always starts with listening.
Yes, it's an interesting project. You're sitting in front of the people who are managing who are managing it. Ciao. Okay, another question. Then we'll open to the questions from the public. Do you think there is any risk that, since we are talking about technology and media, that less educated people or poorer people do not have access to this opportunity to dialogue with the administration? Is there any risk that this can stress inequality in a city?
So everything we do that has to do with the internet, there has to be a community element. However, I'll get to that in like 2 seconds. Structurally, we are looking at more and more ways to get Wi-Fi into neighborhoods, to increase broadband access, and that's what the Chief Technology Officer is working on. While he's working on that, there are a couple things, is that you don't need internet to engage, because we have these things. And a lot of we call it the digital divide. There are a lot of people who just skipped the computer, they didn't have to buy a computer, so but they can use their mobile device. So it's important that as governments, we make sure that what we're doing for online is mobile friendly. So that's one kind of structural part of it. The other part is that when we did those Facebook town hall meetings, we actually did, one of the things that was really important is we went out into the communities and created viewing locations. Libraries, community centers. We had one that was all Spanish language. So we went into a predominantly Mexican neighborhood in the city, and we have an office called the Office of New Americans. Adolfo from that office went and he sat and watched the town hall with a group of Spanish speakers and then engaged in a dialogue about what they just saw. So you have the mayor sitting at a college doing this online, but you also had people all over the city in viewing locations. And there are over like 300 places where you can go in Chicago to use the internet for free, from libraries and parks and all this. So absolutely, we cannot allow the internet to start creating more divides. We have to use it to bridge divides. So making sure that mobile community outreach, and this is actually for us that gets sentimental about government. You saw, like, there's one place we had a viewing center, and there was a grandmother, and she was watching this on the internet, and her grandson was showing her how to do it. So now not only do you have this engagement happening, but that grandmother is getting technical training. She's learning how to use a computer. So we use this experience to interact with the mayor as a way to get more people into our centers to train them on how to use technology. But that's an excellent question. I think it's something that we always have to be thinking about when we get outside of rooms like this.
C'erano già un paio di domande dal pubblico. Questions? Marco Zamperini, that was the first one. Vieni qui.
I got a question for Kevin. First of all, thank you very much for giving us this vision of a possible future. I hope this will become real also for our country in a far future. I'm afraid, but
yeah, I'm here until Friday.
Yeah.
So let's get working.
Okay, we can work in. My question is. you gave us a very clear view of a good practice, and so all the good news, wonderful. But I'd like to have your opinion about the dark side of the social media, because as far as you know, every day for the company like that expose themselves on Twitter or on Facebook or something like that, they have to take count of fake followers or reputation attack. So I think that when you manage a public administration account, you have the same trouble. So which is in general, or if you have any example of reputational crisis that you have to manage, or if not, we are happy. I mean, I think it's also in general, because you can, if I don't like the mayor of Chicago, I could make a fake account on Twitter, major complaint, and have by 100,000 followers, and that's it. And I could start a campaign. So how can you prevent or defend yourself from stuff like that?
So the first part about that is there actually is a fake mayor account. It happened during the campaign, and he wrote a book about the experience. It was hilarious. So this was actually something that happened during the campaign. Is a man created a fake account that sounded like the mayor, and it was very offensive, and it's vulgar. They used language that is not appropriate for children. But he created this whole fantasy universe about the mayor, and Rahm Emanuel, some say he doesn't always, he uses very colorful language. So this was kind of a parody. We laughed at it. And we actually didn't know, the campaign didn't know who this guy was. So the campaign said, we will give $5,000 to a charity if this person will come forward. And then we met him and we had a laugh. So you have to embrace that. With the good sort of comes the bad. The other thing is that we never controlled our own reputations. It wasn't as though we had this control over everything. And then the internet happened, and now the people have control. Our reputation was always in the hands of the people, whether it was in the piazza or whether it was on Facebook, right? So we just had to the internet didn't change that. It maybe amplified it or raised the volume on it. I think what we also, while there will be people who don't like us, there are also a lot of people who do appreciate the work that's being done. And if we can leverage, if you can increase your participation with those who really respect what you're doing, at the end of the day, these might get drowned out. And one comment I will say as an example about this, every time we post on our Facebook page, we always have people that disagree. And we always have people that write things. And as long as they are respectful, they can disagree. And we welcome that disagreement. So for every negative comment, you've got some good comments and then some bad comments. And we appreciate that. And we think that's kind of the thrill of doing this. I think the risk is you can't focus too much on those sorts of things. So there's sometimes when we post stuff, and we know that there are certain people who are always going to jump in. And you just have to sort of take that as the day goes. But we never really control our reputation, but we can help. We can't control the conversation, but maybe we can help shape it. But we can't shape it if we're not participating. So if I'm not in the room, I can't tell you anything. And so I think that's kind of the way we approach it.
Altre domande?
Yeah, a short question. So I found your presentation very, very interesting and useful, professionally speaking. As you said at the start, nobody can consider himself an expert or a guru because, we are building this right now. Could you share an experience of something you created or you did online that it had a goal and that it backfired or didn't work as you expected, if you can?
Yeah, I think so far, I would say that there are things that fell short of our expectation, but didn't really backfire. And there's a reason for that. But I will say just today, like literally 4 hours ago, we launched our first ever attempt to crowdfund a program. So we set a goal of about $500,000 to get money to have a midnight basketball program. So we're going to take kids, instead of hanging out on the street, come play basketball at midnight. But we didn't have the money for it, so we're doing micro donations and crowdfunding, and that launched today. I have no idea if that's going to be successful. So you will know, call me in 60 days, and I can answer that question again. But here's another piece of this, and it kind of goes to what you talked about. I think sometimes there's a problem when organizations say social media, and the reaction is we need to hire a college student, or we need to hire somebody in their 20s. I think what you have to do is this, what we almost would call reverse mentoring or reverse internship. Because you have people at your organization who are expert at this engagement stuff, who really, really get it. So maybe you have a 50-year-old person who really understands engagement and a 22-year-old that really understands Twitter. The risk is not letting them talk to each other. So lots of those times that you see a social media disaster, many times it could have just been they gave someone the keys who understood the technology but did not understand appropriate engagement. And then you've got people who really understand appropriate engagement, but they don't understand the technology. And in the middle is where that success is going to lie. What we try to do is create, when we have people managing social media, there are different layers that people are allowed to use. So for example, if the tweet says, what time does the office open, an intern can answer that. But if someone tweets, what's your position on immigration, or how do you feel about guns, that's a different layer. That has to go to a different layer, just like the telephone. So you don't let interns answer the phone and just start talking to people. You manage that. And so I think you need to manage those same internal communications processes as you would with the telephone or you would with email as the social media space. I think you get in trouble when you only think about this as a technology and you forget that there's people that have to be involved who are experienced.
Ci sono altre domande?
I heard about an experience of participation in the city of Chicago about participatory budgeting. I don't know whether this involved you as social media, but I want just to ask you if you have experience, because participatory budget is probably the high level of involvement of people in the government of a town, of a city.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something we actually talked about. We were involved with that process. That was something that we led, and we thought it was a very good way of gathering feedback from the people, but also identifying places where we need to maybe be a little more clear. Because sometimes there was a lot of, and I talked about this earlier, but sometimes it identified places where people just didn't know what the city was doing. So it allowed us the opportunity to educate while at the same time gathering information for the budget. And then that entire budget went online, and people could actually see where their ideas ended up in the final budget.
I'll put a question to you if there are no further questions from the public. Sì, vai.
Volevo aggiungere una cosa sulla possibile esclusione di alcune fasce di popolazione. Forse lo stesso Alberto Cottica, seconda volta che lo citiamo.
I nostri riferimenti sono quelli.
Aveva fatto un'interessante riflessione, per cui non dimentichiamo che attraverso gli strumenti del digitale ci sono altre fasce di popolazione che rimangono, che sono incluse, che solitamente sono escluse. Pensiamo per esempio, la provocazione era, pensiamo al politico di 60 anni che è al centro nella sala dei bottoni ma è escluso nei social media. Mentre pensiamo al precario che è escluso dalla stanza dei bottoni, che però è super rappresentato dentro i social media. Per cui quello che a me piace pensare è che in qualche modo i social media ridisegnano l'arena pubblica anche in questo contesto, per cui è chiaro che se devo fare delle politiche devo pensare che le fasce più anziane sono a rischio di esclusione, però devo anche pensare, cioè nessuno mai pensa che alle elezioni va a votare il 60%, nessuno si pone il dubbio di dire ma non sono rappresentative, è così. Quindi io io credo che i social media sono un grandissimo strumento, nessuno mai ha avuto la possibilità di parlare a così tante persone in tempo reale, il famoso referendum continuo, no? La citazione di Bloomberg, per cui ok, siamo consapevoli che c'è una fascia di popolazione che rimane fuori, ma siamo altresì consapevoli che c'è una fascia di popolazione che non è mai stata così inclusa e che attraverso l'uso dei media sociali noi possiamo in qualche modo valorizzare.
Grazie. My question was, you mentioned earlier putting in the open data portal data about lobbyists. Do you think there is any kind of data that should not be public? This is a very WikiLeaks question.
Yeah, I mean, anything that puts the public safety at risk. And that's something we had to look at with different sorts of data. Publishing individuals' addresses, like anything that would be a public safety issue. One thing that I do want to note, and I'm not sure how this, we're talking to crowds from different countries, one thing to note is that in the United States, all of this data was already public. It was just hard to understand. So you would get the so you'd request lobbyist data, and you might get a PDF like this, and like good luck with that lobbyist data. So the pieces that was already considered, our salaries were already public, the lobbyist data was public, the budgets were considered public documents, but there's a difference between being public and being accessible, and they weren't overly accessible. Now that they're online, you can see them. If you can sort them in an Excel file. Someone today, I was meeting with someone from the government today in Milan, and they said, how many employees does Chicago have? And I said, I don't know, but we could go online right now and sort an Excel file, and we could see that in real time. So I think there's a difference. So there are data sets that have to get out and be public, but for the most part in the United States, a lot of that, if you were a journalist, you did have access to. It just wasn't easy.
Antonella Napolitano is also editor from a few months for a new foundation called Il Diritto di Sapere, the right to know. What do you think about this?
Well, that's exactly the issue here. I mean, Diritto di Sapere is an NGO that works on access to information in Italy. We're now monitoring how access to information works in Italy in public administration, in ministers, but also in city regions and other kinds of public institutions. And the problem is sometimes the data are not public, and they should be. Like by law they should be, and sometimes it happens what you just said, Kevin, that data are there, are published, but are kind of hidden in like a website, very complicated website, or are on a PDF, and it's basically useless. But I think that part of the problem is also, and I don't know about the US specifically, but problem is that in public administration there's a culture, there's not a culture of transparency. There's this, and you can see that in many ways, but there's this sort of way of thinking that if you add information, if you're in public administration and you have information, you kind of have some power. You kind of have some power that you don't want to share. And if the people ask you for information, and that's what are we working on, you are not likely to give it to them. You kind of shift the duty to another organization. But important thing is in Italy is that an open government, an open data movement has been building in these past few years. So there are several organizations working on transparency, working on open government, working on open data, and sometimes they work on different parts of the problem, but they're getting together. So and it's not a technology thing. It's not a technology problem. It's a sometimes it's a human right problem, it's an information problem, it's a transparency problem. So it's something that citizens should be part of, not just on a technological side.
And something just very important that I think is worth, as we're talking about this, and I promised I wouldn't get philosophical, but I lied. you have to answer the question, who does the data belong to? And for us, the data belongs to the people. So if that's the mindset you have working in this open data space, you can talk about transparency and access and accessibility and all of these things, but at the core, you have to believe that data belongs to the people. And if you start from there, the possibilities are endless in what you can do with open data to empower the citizens.
Abbiamo ancora 58 secondi per un'ultima domanda, se volete. Vai. 49.
It's a question for Kevin, and actually, of course, it's an amazing job you did so far, and actually have two questions for you. First, if during the election campaign of your mayor, all the social media strategy was in some way part of the campaign, and how much, let's say, of the overall budget of the city has been devoted to the social media strategy?
So the first part is elections and government have to be completely separate. So I actually wouldn't be if I'm in this job in the government, I wouldn't work on the campaign. I can't speak, though, one of the differences, communications and social media during a campaign is to promote a promise. Social media and government is to act upon that promise and prove to people you're working. So when it comes to re-elections, the only thing legally I can do to help the mayor get reelected is make the city run as well as it can. And then it's up to the people, unless I quit my job and go and work on the campaign. So I had to sort of keep those things separate. But we get reelected by doing a good job and by engaging. The other side was about the budget. So I'm considered a press, so on the old budget, I was a press secretary, now I'm a communications director. So that was more or less of an even trade as far as I can tell. I have a deputy who's part of this press staff. I think the short answer is the staff is not any bigger, it's just organized slightly differently. So if you think that social media is a priority, prove it by putting people on your staff that sort of understand the space. So I'm fully dedicated to social media. I have a deputy and a person that just started who's kind of helping with community management. Most of the people in the agencies and departments are not social media solely. They are communications people who are also managing social, which is really, really important because those are the people who are talking to journalists, who are writing speeches, who are managing the message. So it only seems natural that they would also manage that in social. So that was a responsibility shift for those people. And then as far as the open data, I'm sure there's some costs in running, the open data portal, but I think it's mostly minimal personnel. There's no line you can check. There's no line in the budget that says open data social media. For the most part, it's been a shift of thinking, not so much a shift in money. And that's kind of, I think that's the only way I can answer that.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for attending tonight, and thank you to Michele, Antonella, and Kevin for being here tonight.